Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. I get my sound going here. Yep, there we go. How you doing? Been a while. Just kind of coming over my cold now. It was a humdinger. Phlegm bullets, that kind of stuff. Bit of a fever. Tonight I'm just going to ramble on a little bit. I'm going to try and tie up the reality of imagination. And what's more than that, most of the explanation I've given you is about how the imagination interacts with you as an individual and shows you things, gives you object data, takes you places that don't exist in the world but really do exist. This is the principle of spiritual travel and the growth of consciousness. And it's different when it's done with a sacred heart. It's not the same thing as remote viewing. Everything a human being does should be done from the heart. I don't know why there is such a contempt. I don't know why there is such a ridicule for heart, for the heart, for feeling. We're fascinated with mind now. And for those of you who follow astrology, and I know many of you who follow the Talamanca Review are well versed in astrology, you might know that we're in a very dark time right now. And what we worship and what we celebrate, worship is what we give our attention to. But true worship is from the being. The ego can't really worship anything. It envies something and pretends it's worship. So the male adolescent who envies the rock star pretends that he worships the rock star. But it's envy because the ego can't worship. Interesting, isn't it? Same thing with the young woman who idolizes a model or a female performer like Ariana Grande or Taylor Swift. It's not worship. The ego cannot worship. It seems that way because there's a lot of magic involved. And magic is the great deceiver, right? But it's ego. Everything in the 20th century has been done with the ego. The system we live in does not want you to have an awakened imagination. The system that we live in does not want you to have a realized imagination, which is the stepping stone to the realization of self. Because the realized imagination, the awakened imagination, which can give object data, and when it's working properly, it won't invade other people's privacy. It won't do psychic things unless the information you're overlapping has a direct bearing on you and your well-being. Then you might have a moment of clairvoyance or psychic insight. I recommend you keep those things to yourself if they do happen. They create envy in other people, and fear and superstition. And they're not to be deliberately cultivated. You show me somebody out there as a spiritual teacher, living, working, making money under that title, spiritual teacher, and what they're really teaching is psychic awareness, psychic unfoldment, I will show you a warlock. And it is not good to be a warlock. In my journey, especially in the last 5 years, from 2020 to now, 2025, 5.5 years, it really begins with the publishing of Stardust Ranch, which changed my life, actually. I didn't become famous or anything, but it introduced me to a world of people that then wanted to get to know me. And so I met a lot of very interesting people. I'm not here to put anyone down. I'm here to enforce the free will contract. You do what you want to do. If you want to study magic, study magic. I counsel against it. But if you have to go through that lesson to learn something the hard way, then you go through that lesson. Lord knows I've banged my head against the wall many times. Lord knows I've had to learn many things the hard way. Because I'm stupid. I'm just not that bright. So I'm not issuing a religious edict. I'm not the Vatican. I'm not the Sanhedrin. I'm not an Islamic caliphate. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to share with you. That's all I want to do. Share some things I've learned. Share some things that are known to me, have been made known to me, and to share the beauty and the joy of the inner life, which is 90% discipline and 10% reward. Okay? Most of meditation is just sitting still. I can go days and days and days without a meaningful awakened imagination experience, without a journey in spirit in meditation, without lifting out of the body. And that's because I still need more discipline. And so I keep doing it because the discipline's important. And unlike anything else that you practice in this world, the discipline of practicing internal art, spiritual art, is forever. You carry it forward with you because the entire creation we live within, this entire divine hologram, this world of Maya, this world of illusion, as the Buddhas tell us, is created for us to escape and find the world of truth. And the world of truth is within us. It's nowhere out in the world. And it certainly is not on the Temple Mount. Granted, that area will have certain valuations within the world of geomancy. And I think I'm going to do a classic Bruce lookup here, because that is worth looking up. Geomancy definition: the art of placing or arranging buildings or other sites suspiciously. Number 2, divination from configurations seen in a handful of earth thrown on the ground, or by interpreting lines or textures on the ground. I don't think that's quite it. Let me try Gemini. Gemini. I have Gemini now. I pay $24.95 a month for AI. It helps a lot with my work. What is geomancy, and does it play any role in the desire of the rabbis to have the Temple Mount as the site to build the Temple of Solomon? Well, it's having to think about this one. Geomancy, unearthing the ancient art of earth divination and its absence in the rabbinic desire for the Temple Mount. Geomancy, an ancient and diverse practice of divination based on interpreting markings on the ground or the patterns of the earth, holds no documented role in the profound Jewish desire for the Temple Mount as the site for the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon. The rabbinic aspiration for this sacred location is deeply rooted in centuries of religious scripture, historical significance, and a continuous tradition of prayer and longing entirely independent of geomantic beliefs. What is geomancy? Derived from the Greek geomanteia, meaning earth divination, geomancy encompasses a variety of methods used to gain insight and guidance by interpreting the earth's features. Its forms are varied and have been practiced across numerous cultures for millennia. They give the example of feng shui, dowsing, and ley lines. I am pretty sure this factors into the temple too. The Torah, the foundational text of Judaism, identifies Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount, as the location where Abraham was commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac. It is also where Jacob dreamt of a ladder ascending to heaven, leading him to declare the site of the house as the house of God and the gate of heaven. Jewish tradition holds that divine presence, or Shekinah, is uniquely manifest at this location. And that's, of course, nonsense, but I'll leave that alone, out of respect for the belief of others. Site of the first and second temples. Solomon in the 10th century BCE built the first temple on this site, which became the central point of Jewish worship and national life. Its destruction by the Babylonians, the second temple was built on the same location and stood for nearly 600 years, until its destruction by the Romans in 70 CE. The western wall, a retaining wall of the Second Temple complex, remains the most sacred site in Judaism for prayer. Prophetic vision and messianic hope. Jewish eschatology, the theology of end times, anticipates the rebuilding of a third temple on the Temple Mount as a precursor to the messianic era. This belief is a cornerstone of Jewish prayer and is expressed in daily liturgy. Historical continuity. For 2 millennia, despite being barred from the site for significant periods, Jews have faced Jerusalem and the Temple Mount in prayer. The physical location is inextricably linked to Jewish identity, history, and a longing for redemption. In conclusion, while geomancy offers a fascinating lens through which various cultures have sought to understand and interact with their environment, it is a separate and distinct tradition from the religious and historical imperatives that drive the rabbinic and broader Jewish desire to rebuild the Temple of Solomon on the Temple Mount. Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with that. Calling it, I'm going to have to disagree with that. And if they did consider it a doorway to heaven, you have to wonder why Solomon allowed a temple to Moloch to be built right beside it. Anyways, I digress. That was a long digression to talk about the temple. So the awakened imagination is what we're seeking, and then ultimately the expression of imaginative energies, which are a current of energy deep within us, and these are always object. They are forms of sound and light, colors of light and different sounds, celestial music, if you will, which form the energy and the vibration coming from the Creator that sustains each dimension in reality at a separate frequency of sound, a separate sound, and a separate coloration. And to bring it right down to the physical, the expression of that on the physical would be thunder and lightning, raw energy. So in explaining the mysteries of imagination to you and recontextualizing the notion of sin, because that's what understanding the imagination does. Okay? It recontextualizes sin for you. So when religious leaders in the past would say, don't do this, 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 or this, if you study the edict closely, it was either related to social harmony, like don't stoop your neighbor's wife. You're only going to create disharmony in your neighborhood, in your pueblo. Don't do it. But if they were related to individual actions that didn't involve a second person and the destabilizing of the harmony of your community, they're very often about polluting your imagination. Now, they don't come right out and say that because the theology of awakened imagination is unique to me, with the help of many poets. William Blake, Wallace Stevens, John Donne, Lotta. And the very utility of mythology to begin with. The architecture of the mythological mind. So when you fantasize, when you try to produce something that you want through the imagination that you should be accessing physically, you're fantasizing, you're polluting your imagination. And if sin is an accounting of the spiritual presence within you, and it is, then that fantasy blocks the real from coming in. Now, fantasy can take many forms, and all fantasy springs from the ego. And that's why the ego is terrified of awakened imagination. Do you understand? Terrified. Doesn't want it. And the ego is the building block of society. Margaret Mead said it was the family. I'm telling you, the ego is the building block of society. You cannot have a society of people who do not have egos. A society of people who do not have egos would live completely independently, and quite frankly, if they were living in their true selves, they would need no governance. They would need no policing. You understand? So the imagination is what begins the liberation process. The imagination is the landscape within which we can explore the entire universe and more. Other realities entirely. What have I been telling you since the inception of the Talamanca Review about, let's say, the UFO phenomenon? That it is first and foremost a consciousness or an imaginative experience but it is an object imaginative experience. If you are visited, if you were one of the people who was abducted by Greys, that was an object experience, but it took place largely inside your consciousness. There may have been physical markings on your body. And it's a very interesting thing that whatever is a governing principle in this reality, or the principalities of governance in this reality, they maintain their governance by a mastery over the fourth dimension and being able to slip in and out of it into the third dimension at will. The fourth dimension, the astral, is the province of imagination. So if something can come from the fourth dimension into the third dimension, it's a footnote in my thesis that the imagination is real. Remember that short clip I played some time ago? Not that long ago, maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks ago. I forget the name of the podcast I played it in. It was a short Stephen Greer clip. And he said, I've been in laboratories where the scientists have created a toroidal field, and out of the toroidal field, a creature will come out fully 3D from the ninth circle of hell and run around the lab. So they're pulling from the fourth dimension into the third dimension. But for most of us, the fourth dimension is the landscape of imagination. And this is why you should not fantasize. It's a misuse of imagination, and this is why we are quite deliberately motivated to fantasize, especially in the modern first world. Okay? Now I'm going to move into a new chapter on the reality of imagination. And I'm going to talk about the consequences of the imagination being formed from the outside in. This is the very basis of MK Ultra. I need you to think about this for a moment. The mind control, all of the conditioning, I mean, they got really good after it, at it after World War II. But mind control has always been here. You need to recontextualize it. You need to use my language. Mind control is the domination of imagination with external facts, to corrupt the possibility of the imagination awakening on its own. Do you understand? These are not easy ideas to understand. But it would be well worth your while to understand these things. Now, I have often said on the Talamanca Review that I personally, without any offense to anybody who lives by a faith defined by prophecy. It is not my intent to offend you, but while we still have free speech, I'm going to use it. If I'm told to stop saying these things at the risk of consequence or incarceration, I will probably take the warning and stop talking about them. Because my responsibility is really to my own unfoldment. The fact that I have liberty to speak publicly at this time is wonderful. The fact that there are ears out there who can hear me is equally wonderful, inspiring, and beautiful. It moves me. But if such a time were to come about where I was instructed to stop what I'm doing, I probably would. If it was done by a duly constituted government, even if the government was tyrannical by any reasonable definition. Now I'm working into something here. I'm working into one of the biggest knots in spiritual understanding. A knot which has to be untied. And this knot focuses on the individual and the collective. And you have to unknot your individuality from the collectivity. You can't think in the herd if you're going to grow. You have to be radically independent in your thinking. Or, I shouldn't use the word thinking per se, but I suspect you know my intent. You should be radically independent in the cultivation of your own awakened imagination, because your awakened imagination is the source of the scriptures. If you awaken your own imagination, you don't need to read the scriptures. They're inside you. Do you understand? Now, what happens where let me do some quick math here. Let's say that 33 years is a generation. Let's say then there are 3 generations per century. So, in 10 centuries, there would be 30 generations. And in 20 centuries, there would be about 60 generations. What happens to a collective spirit, a collective thinking and feeling process, which is part of the lived experience when you incarnate into these cultures, these prophetic cultures with their external indoctrinations, whether it be the rabbis, the Catholic priests, the Protestant ministers, or the Islamic clergy. You're looking at 60 generations of indoctrination for Christians. Significantly more if you're Jewish. You're looking at 90 generations, 3,000 years instead of 2. Right? 90 generations. Very fascinating. Now, what happens is over time, it becomes very difficult to break with what you've been told. If it weren't for the 20th century, we would not have broken from Christianity. I, for one, think that was a good thing. I think Christianity had become a rather dead and, quite frankly, a diabolical religion. Not trying to offend anybody. Okay? If you want to read the Gospels and make of it what you will and try to live that way and give the shirt off your back and put other people before yourself, I will definitely say that I honor you. I just haven't met anybody who does that. Okay? Everything touched by this prophetic tradition is almost finished, and it's a dead system and it won't survive. They don't need it in the East. They don't need a prophetic tradition, and the reason is the living voice is produced in every generation. People with Buddha consciousness come into every generation. People with yogic consciousness come into every generation. They don't have to worship some dude who lived 2,000 years ago. And here's a curiosity. I'm very curious about this. Talking about dead religions. Gemini.
According to Wikipedia.
Yeah, Thank you very much. Here's a humdinger. If the Jews reject Christ and reject Muhammad as prophets, who in fact is the last prophet accepted by the rabbinical administrators? I'm more than a little curious. It's showing me it's thinking, although there's nothing on the screen. There's a wheel spinning. Aha. So Malachi is the final prophet in rabbinical Judaism. This is interesting. Let's dig into this a little bit. In rabbinical Judaism, the last prophet accepted by religious authorities is Malachi. The consensus among rabbinic scholars is that the era of classical prophecy known as Nevuah concluded in the 5th century BCE with the ministries of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So 2,500 years they haven't had a prophet. I guess they don't need them anymore, which would be a good thing. So even the Jews are agreeing with me that the prophetic system was to grow you to a point where you don't need prophets anymore. If the religion is still functioning, I don't think it is. According to Jewish tradition, as articulated in the Talmud and other classical texts, the period of direct prophetic communication from God ceased after the death of these 3 prophets. This marked the end of the line of prophets that began with Moses and spanned centuries, delivering divine messages, ethical teachings, and future predictions to the people of Israel. The Talmud states that after the last prophets, the Shekinah, divine presence, departed from Israel. What do they want to go back there for? Is this not just contradicting the last answer that Gemini AI gave me about why they want to build the temple there? While Judaism acknowledges the continuation of a lesser form of divine communication known as Bat Kol, a heavenly voice, this is not considered to be on the same level as the direct and clear revelations experienced by the prophets. Therefore, within the framework of rabbinical Judaism, which forms the basis of mainstream Jewish belief and practice today, there have been no universally accepted prophets after Malachi, 2,500 years ago. The teachings and writings of the prophets contained within the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, are considered complete and authoritative. The Jewish faith anticipates the return of prophecy in the Messianic era, but does not recognize any prophetic claims that have arisen since the time of Malachi. So take that, you Christians and Muslims. Of course, it's all ridiculous, nonsensical, okay? If the culmination of the delivery of information to the Jews is in fact the Kabbalah, then whatever they're following is certainly not divine. This much we can conclude quite easily, actually. Now, let us return to my core thesis. The individual and the collective. So, if you're an American now, and you feel the same way I do about the prophetic lineage as a form of spiritual direction for people, you would be absolutely disgusted by the Trump administration. You would be absolutely disgusted by the expression of Christianity in America. You would probably be equally disgusted by the expression of Judaism, and certainly equally disgusted by the now proliferating presence of Islam in America, with, I believe, Dearborn, Michigan as being its center point now. Land of deer hunting and fly fishing, or lake fishing, actually. Fly fishing is in rivers. Michigan is the land of lakes. So what rights do you have if you reject prophetic tradition and you live in a society where a significant enough portion of the population can sway politicians who are basically prostitutes, meaning they sell themselves? And these days it's quite literal. Most of them are catamites. By the way, in the ancient world, catamites were not scorned or spat upon, but it was well understood by the Greeks and the Romans that you do not put catamites into positions of authority. Okay. Maybe a pederast, he who penetrates the catamite, but not the catamite. Catamite was considered to be a form of female consciousness almost. And females were really not considered to be good leadership material. The war effort of the West in aiding Zelensky and Zelensky himself are largely catamites now. Am I the only person noticing this? Go back and study Marcus Aurelius. Go back and study whatever writings you can find from Gaius Julius Caesar, Kaiser, and see what they say about catamites. They didn't even really want them in their armies. Now, you could be a catamite and you could wander the streets of Rome and sell your ass to rich merchants, and nobody would say you're a filthy catamite. There were no Christians back then. Same thing in Greece. In fact, the 14-year-old boy was almost the height of the aesthetic in the human form for the Greeks. The buttocks of a 14-year-old boy. But they did not promote catamites to positions of authority in warfare, in statesmanship, in economics, in diplomacy, in anything. So we're kind of now at the end of this age of Pisces living the catamites' revenge, aren't we? Because they've taken over everything. And their first cousin, the angry lesbian. You know? Whether it be Beetlejuice, the mayor of Chicago, or that hideous creature that was the premier of Ontario, who introduced the new sex ed program, which taught sodomy in grade 1, at which point children are 6 years old. This is the revenge of the catamites. Now, a lot of the extreme behavior, in my opinion, is a reaction to the prophetic presence in the cultures and their disgust with it. Now, when they express their disgust of it by contradicting it as fully as they can, which is to do something considered a cardinal sin in these prophecy-based religions, they're saying as clearly as they can, I don't believe a word you're saying. Which is fine. We live in a free will space. But how did we arrive at a point where they're running everything now? You know? The stories are coming in about Starmer now and his young male prostitutes. And he himself may well have been a catamite for Jimmy Savile and the royal family. It's the cult mocking us. Bread and circuses. So the answer to my riddle about the knot between the collective and the individual is simple, and it's manifestly right in front of you without me having to say anything. And it is manifest in me. So the solution to escaping the collective fate of a people gripped by a false spirituality and a lunacy is to leave those people. And if this lunacy grips the world in different measures through country to country, then go remote. Because when these believed imaginative constructs, so faith is a believed imaginative construct. It's an imaginative construct that you put into your head, given to you by rabbis, priests, and imams through the study of books, that becomes a template and the fulcrum, that which moves the lever of your thinking and perception, and the foundation of all imagination. And that imagination begins to move off of the templated prophecy. This is why everybody looking at the world today, these days, has a biblical interpretation for it. Isn't that convenient? A bunch of guys said this would happen. They put it in a book, and oh my God, look at that. It's happening. You see how it works? It's a joke. They're making it happen. The food shortages, the pestilence, the disease, the war, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are all levers pulled by the controllers. They're not acts of God, unless God subcontracts his work to nefarious hedge fund managers and nefarious activist billionaires and nefarious tech billionaires. You think God subcontracts? I don't want to work with a God that subcontracts. If I'm going to witness an act of God, I want it to be a bona fide act of God. Not the machinations of men fabricating a prophecy. So, this is like fucking Wizard of Oz is what it is. The great and powerful Wizard of Oz. And what is the greatest casualty of all? The unawakened imagination. That your own imagination never wakes up, that you never come to understand your own prophetic ability, which everybody has. And this habit of creating these religious figures, the whole thing is just bullshit. Okay, no, I'm not saying that the prophets didn't deliver some good and ethical information and provide guidance for the ancient Hebrews. They did. But if you look into that material and you take the most cursory of glances at some of the websites out there on YouTube or the YouTube channels out there now, you'll see what I've been telling you since the inception of the Talamanca Review, that it was largely extraterrestrial. Always has been. Largely extraterrestrial. You're never going to get it till you get it yourself. And nobody can do the work for you. And the Talamanca Review, if anything, is a form of inspiration for you to do the work yourself. And I'm telling you, it's worth it. It yields fruit. It's not complicated. It's the simplest thing in the world. Now, when you factor into consciousness its manifestation capabilities, then, as I've said numerous times on this podcast, every believer in prophecy becomes a psychic conscript in the fulfillment of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, not an act of God. It's high magic. You know what you can do with 1 million people who are all believing the same thing? If you can tap into that belief and pull that energy out of them, I can tell you that energy is a treasure sought all over the universe and employed deftly by the controllers of this planet. But look, I'm not saying that we should live in anarchy. There's nothing wrong with the world having controllers. It would be nice if they were benign and a little less self-centered and significantly less evil. It would be nice if they didn't eat us. It would be nice if they didn't rape and murder us. It would be nice if they did not torture and terrorize us to produce biochemical drugs for their amusement. That's all I'm asking. Is a good king. I would take Longshanks at this point from Braveheart compared to what we're dealing with now. So this is how I wanted to round off the reality of imagination. And to let you know that by failing to awaken in your own imagination, you are failing to fully contribute to the transformation of the human race at this moment in history. And you are failing to contribute to the overcoming of the diabolical forces that grip the collective mind and the collective imagination, which is now fossilized, frozen in place, like a handprint in dry cement. And somebody has to go in with a jackhammer and break it all up and let that imagination free. Because only the free imagination has a chance of being useful to the human race. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.